Good evening and good morning, everyone. Welcome to attend our webinar on Xiaoqing. I'm Calvin Hui from 3812 Gallery, your moderator today. In the past decades, we have seen lots of discussions around post-war abstract art, particularly in the Asian art market. One of the leading figures in this arena is Xiaoqing. Born in Shanghai in 1935, lived in Milan for 6 decades, where he co-founded Punto International Art Movement and organized 13 Punto exhibitions between 1962 and 1966. And in recent years, museums around the globe organized solo exhibitions for Xiaoqing and examined his contributions and significance from Beijing, Shanghai to Paris, and among all, Rothko Art Center organized In My Beginning Is My End, The Art of Xiaoqing exhibition in 2020, curated by Mr. Philip Dodd. The exhibition offered a brand new perspective and opened a dialogue between Mark Rothko's and Xiaoqing's spiritual abstraction in Mark Rothko's birthplace. We are delighted to have Mark Rothko Art Center exhibition curator, Ms. Farida Saladillo, and renowned curator, Mr. Philip Dodd, to join our panel discussion today. It is also a great pleasure to having Mr. Felix Kuo, Director and Head of Modern Art, Sotheby's Asia, to share his experience and knowledge in the market development of post-war art and his view on Xiaoqing's place and value in the 20th century art history. To set a foundation for today's discussion, I will invite these renowned speakers to share their views. So to start, may I invite Farida to introduce herself and talk about the Mark Rothko Art Center. Farida, please.
Warm greeting from the birthplace of Mark Rothko to everyone. Just a few words about our new institution who came in existence in 2013 and become a significant, a single cultural object who tremendously changed the cultural world of the city and of the region. No one believed, and Philip Dodd was he was a witness of our inauguration, and all journalists asked me, how can you hope to bring people, thousands of people, to such place in the middle of nowhere, which even has no airport. But the name of Mark Rothko made the miracle, and now we are well known on the cultural map of Europe and not only. So from the very beginning, the strategy of Mark Rothko Center was to try to find out and to see how ideas of abstract expressionism are developing and spreading all over the world. And we invite artists for art symposium and art residency program. They work here, they exhibit their works and exchange experiences. So it is absolutely clear that abstract expressionism is still actual in artistic field, not only in Europe, but in Asia. And of course, not anyone of living artists can ignore the experience of Mark Rothko artistic achievements. So,
thank you, Farida. It is actually amazing. Thanks to Mark Rothko Art Center, we had Xiaoqing exhibition. Yeah, first time he had such important exhibition in Latvia. And also thanks to this exhibition, now Mr. Philip Dodd in the UK, me and Miss Felix Kwok in Hong Kong, and also Farida, you in Daugavpils. So we can sit together and talk about Mark Rothko and talk about post-war abstract art in the 20th century history. So let's go back to also share different views from Mr. Philip Dodd and also Felix to talk about why is contemporary art by artists from multicultural backgrounds so valuable in today's art market. So may I invite Philip to start sharing your views?
Calvin, thanks very much, and it's a great pleasure to be part of this. You know, we all use the word global now without thinking, but I don't really consider that we've thought what it does to the art world, and Felix knows this very well from an art market perspective. I think now we have to recognize that identities are plural. You don't belong either to the East or the West, which is what you think in the 20th century you had to belong to, but we know you can have multiple loyalties. And if you think of Anish Kapoor, who had a show in Shenzhen recently, who's Indian and British, or you think of Jiang Dachang, who was Chinese and Brazilian and American, he lived in all those places, or Kim Lin, who's just had a show at Tate Britain, who was Singaporean and British. Now, it's for that reason, or amongst those reasons, that I think Xiaoqing is so important. Although he was born even longer ago than I was born, I think he's a very contemporary artist because his loyalties are multiple. They're Italian and they're Chinese. I think more important than that, he brings lots of different art resources from European and Chinese art history. And these actually enrich, they don't dilute his achievement. So for me, what's fascinating about Xiaoqing, I think out of these multiple identities, these multiple loyalties, these multiple geographical locations, he's actually produced a new aesthetic. And I think it's that aesthetic that we're not yet capable quite of grasping, which I think is what makes him such a fascinating artist.
Yeah, thank you, Philip. Actually, your creation is very inspiring, especially someone like Philip, who has been working especially in the Asian art world for a long time. And Philip is one of the pioneers to create Chinese artist exhibitions, both in China and also in Europe. So I think you are the perfect person to see Xiaoqing or the post-war abstract art from different perspectives, both from the European perspective and also from the global perspective. And here in this panel, Felix Kwok, who is actually in also different role, although we are in the same market, but Philip is now the head of modern art, modern Asian art in Sotheby's. So I'd like to ask Felix, what do you think of this this multicultural identity of artists? How are they influencing the art world? What do you think?
Thanks, Kelvin, and thanks, Philip and Farida, for your sharing. In fact, as an auction house specialist who represents the secondary market's opinion, well, Xiaoqing's recent robust performance on the auction market actually represents the awakening of the Asian collectors about the multicultural identity of our 20th century artists. And Xiaoqing definitely represents a generation which has encountered serious cultural identity crisis of themselves. And he definitely, personally, he traveled a lot and took many different countries and regions as his home for a certain period of his lifetime. So that's why when we are talking about the art of Xiaoqing, simply labeling him as a Chinese artist would be too narrow. And I believe that in his art, if you know more about himself and you know more about the international development of art in the 20th century, especially the post-war era, you will find many more different characteristics and features from Xiaoqing's art. That's why when you are Chinese, probably you will see a lot more Zen and Taoist features in his art. But when you go to Italy, when you see the post-war Italian art, you will find the gene of Xiaoqing's art actually is very much influenced by Italy post-war art. And likewise, he spent his time in London, he spent some time in the United States, and finally, I mean, last but not least, he's currently spending his life in Taiwan. That's why his artistic influence was actually inspired by the international art scene. And the more you study about his art, the more features you can find and more inspiration you can take out from his artistic language.
Yeah, I think this is very correct. Xiaoqing is an ambassador of art. In 1960s, he started his career in Milan, and then he went to America from 1967 to 1972. And then he went back to Milan, and then in the early 1980s, he revisited Asia. So he went to Beijing and Taiwan. So actually, he is a very active art organizer and also artist. And in this sense, Farida, when you decided to organize the solo exhibition for Xiaoqing, so how do you register his artistic achievement through presentation of his solo exhibition in Latvia?
First, I should say that, of course, we are interested in all contemporary stylistic tendencies, but in priority, of course, for us, the artists, international artists who commemorate and who are speaking about Rothko influence and importance in their own development. And of course, in this case, for us, you should understand that we live on the border between Europe and Russia, and East and Oriental art is terra incognita for us. We are not spoiled by many exhibitions from Asia, from China, from India. That's why, of course, it was one point that we were very excited to see what is going on in China, and but Xiaoqing is, of course, is very interesting for us because he is a synthesis. He is a combination of Eastern philosophy, and we knew that philosophy and myths of different cultures were very important for Rothko. We used to identify Rothko with his large-scale classical works, but probably we underestimate his pre-study in his surrealistic time, when he worked 2 years in Metropolitan Library studying all ancient cultures, and there were Christian, Judaism, Buddhism, and Zoroastrianism. And if you read his notebooks, you can find references to different traditions. And when I think about Rothko, I always remember some lines by Lao Tzu. The great space has no angle. The great power doesn't come in rush. The great melody is faintly audible, and the greatest form is formless. So Rothko was very well familiar to Eastern philosophy. And of course, he drew attention to spirituality, he invited his students to study deeply mystic, to read mystic essays and to study different culture. That's why of course, I was greatly excited to bring two others together. And for us, this silent dialogue was, was of highest importance.
Yeah, Farida, you talk about the spirituality in the abstract art. So how do you see the similarities and differences in terms of Xiaoqing and Mark Rothko's approach to spirituality in the abstract art? So Philip, when you were the curator of this important exhibition, so can you share with us, the concept behind and also how you see their approach, the two artists' approach? Yeah.
I think it's important to say that when Rothko is born, he's born into the Russian Empire. So, he isn't even called Mark Rothko. So when he goes to America, when he's a child, he changes his name and he finds himself encountering another culture. Of course, Xiaoqing is born in China and finds himself encountering another culture when he moves to Europe. I took as the title of the show, "In the Beginning is My End," which is a famous poem of T.S. Eliot, one of the greatest 20th century American British poets. And he himself was influenced by Buddha and by Buddhism. So what I wanted to do was to register in this exhibition that Rothko and Xiaoqing both were influenced in obviously profoundly different ways by Eastern thought. Both were migrants, both had to change places. And I think one of the interesting things about Xiaoqing is he told me that when he arrived in Milan, it prompted him to rethink his Chinese inheritance. So this is a man who began to read again Lao Tzu and other Chinese philosophers when he arrives in Europe. So the logic behind the show was to focus as much as we could on his work from the 60s, put it as close to Mark Rothko's paintings of the 60s as we can, and register that both artists in very different ways are interested in art as a form of meditation, a form of spirituality.
Yeah, when Farida mentions that Mark Rothko's, the work of Mark Rothko, we talk about the formless. And when Philip applied or created the theme, in my beginning is my end, it also inspired me to think about the Chinese philosophy that Xiaoqing tried to also portray in their art. It's about the circle of life. As we all know, the spirit of Punto movement is about the punto, the circle, the point. Yeah, this is also talking about the beginning of life and the end of life, but then there's no beginning and there's no end. And from one cell to the universe, to the bigger cell, and finally to, as Farida said, formless actually becomes nothingness. So I think in this sense, both may be also influenced by the philosophy of Buddhism or Chinese. In this perspective, I also see the way Xiaoqing applies the space, the dimension, and also the color, and also the symbols, and in their painting, actually try to infuse the Eastern spirituality, but with the Western abstract art presentation. So I found these two artists, they definitely share the similarities, but they have their differences, of course, because they're totally from different backgrounds. And I also remember Xiaoqing said he met Mark Rothko in the US actually in the 1970s when late 1960s when he was in America, and they encountered, they met and talked to each other, and Xiaoqing told me that actually Mark Rothko didn't speak, so he only looked at the people's eyes and then to to try to see through other people's eyes. So it's quite interesting when I record what Xiaoqing talked about his encounter with Mark Rothko. Felix, when you, sorry.
Excuse me, I just following what you said, wanted to make small addition. In his introduction, what Xiaoqing wrote that the idea of spiritual space, which was taken from Lao Tzu, is not forgotten by me. Yeah. And Mark Rothko, in one of his statements, said, "I don't make a picture, I make a place."
Yeah.
So
actually, it's like when we are talking about Chinese painting, we also talk about Yijing. You know, also the essence or the mindscape, instead of like the reality that what you see. So I also want to ask Felix Kwok, when you create your auctions, I also observed that you try to also introduce post-war art, be them from Asia or from the West, in your sale. So how would you see the interactions between Xiaoqing and also abstract artists from the West, such as Mark Rothko?
Xiaoqing has been quite popular in the auction market for 20, 30 years. But in 2017, when we tried to review the entire career of Xiaoqing and try to rebrand him in Sotheby's market, we took him as a phenomenal artist of the Chinese artists in diaspora in the mid-20th century. When we introduced Xiaoqing, we are not only introduced an individual artist, but he in fact represented the entire generation of Chinese artists who spent their life and career overseas. And we picked Xiaoqing in particular because he, unlike many of his contemporaries, he's not only good at creating his own art, but at the same time, he has a lot of attachments with the rest of the world in the mid-20th century. Not only about his journey from mainland China to Taiwan, and then Italy, England, America, and then back to Taiwan again, but also his personal connection with many important artists and people around the world. It gives us a very strong evidence that how East Midwest really happened in the mid-20th century. That's why when we brought Xiaoqing into our evening sale, we tried to curate and coordinate the entire post-war art scene, from the greater Chinese community to the entire Asia, and then the world, and then the rest of the world. So I think it really created a very strong ripple effect that people begin to have a very strong connection of the artist and the rest of the world, and we bring the entire Asian post-war art scene together. And when we have a more coordinated, a much clearer overview about the post-war Asian art scene, we have a much more clearer picture about the international post-war art scene, and we could put together the very strong conversation between the post-war European, post-war Asian, and post-war American artists. It contributed a lot to the current status of what we have in Asia about our understanding of modern and contemporary art. Not only because we have a much clearer picture about what we actually had 60, 70 years ago, but also we have a much stronger stand to face the very established post-war European and American art scene.
And if I can add to that, I think you could even take that further, which is, I'm not sure, this is a complicated thing to say, I'm not sure diaspora does it anymore as a category. I think it may be a category that we'll have to give up. I'm not thinking of the Chinese diaspora, but the Indian diaspora, the British diaspora, because these people moved backwards and forwards all the time. They were always on the move. So I think diaspora belongs to an earlier moment. In fact, I was sat with somebody, a Chinese friend in London the other day, and somebody used the word diaspora, and he said, I'm not a member of the Chinese diaspora. I live in China and I live here. You know, he was moving. And I think that's the first thing. The second thing to say, and it's easier for me to say than most other people here, I think the indebtedness of Western art to Chinese culture is still not really known. If you think of Yves Klein, the great French artist, Yves Klein is immensely indebted to Buddhism. So the truth is, Xiaoqing, you know, is thought of as a Eastern artist going west, but not enough attention is given to the profound influence of Asia and China on Western art. And the quicker that's done, the better. I think it's really important, you know, and that's when I think Xiaoqing really will be seen as a pioneer.
Yeah, Xiaoqing is almost like a case study. Yeah, when we talk about the development of the 20th century abstract art, especially in Asia, in your role in the auction house, Felix, how could you be so, so brave to bring this markets, because you are almost like the first person or the pioneer to promote the development of post-war, this concept. So why and how do you see this market trend going on in future? And also my another question is, how do you see after all these years, the acceptance of the collectors in Asia or globally for the post-war Asian abstract arts?
I believe the modern and contemporary art market in Asia has been quickly growing in the past decade. Hong Kong has been very strong in the art market internationally, but for 20, 30 years ago, we are mainly focusing on the traditional Chinese art. But in the past decade, modern and contemporary art would definitely be the fastest growing category. So behind the very strong market performance, it actually reflects the interest of Asian collectors. In the past 20, 30 years, they might be more interested in the conservation of the traditional culture. But in the past decade, apparently, they are more confident in the modern contemporary art and culture, and they want to build the cultural identity in terms of in the modern contemporary sense. So the rise of Xiaoqing in the past 4 to 5 years actually represents this mentality of a collector. And as the market grows, we got bottlenecks to break through. And 5 years ago, I would take Xiaoqing as a very important stage of the growth of the market. So that's why I brought Xiaoqing into the evening sale. We curate our sales in a more academic and coordinated way. We are not like selling 20 individual pieces, but we are selling 20 paintings, and they come together and tells a story. So I believe this approach, it's really a game changer in the market in the past 5 years. And you'll find in Asia, our auctions are getting more and more professional, academic, and at the same time, very exciting. And I would say the way we change in terms of curation actually brings new insight to our collectors. And in Asia, you got many different regional collectors who has a previously narrower mindset. Taiwanese collectors, Chinese mainlanders, Hong Kong, Southeast Asian, you can break it down into Singaporean, Indonesian. But when we try to put all the common features together, they found that, okay, actually we belong to a bigger picture in terms of the international art movement. And they found Xiaoqing is actually an international figure, and they all get into the participation of the auction bidding, which is a really, really down-to-earth reflection of his charisma in the market. And that's why the growth of his market price actually reflects the common interest of the Asian collectors in Xiaoqing and in the broader sense, the Asian post-war art. So I believe this is going to be a trend, and it has been a new trend with a very strong and constant growth in the past few years. And I believe in the 2020s, we got 10 more years to go. This trend is going to be one of the pillars which support the growth of the art market in Asia.
Thank you. Wow, this is very encouraging to hear this positive outlook on the post-war abstract art development in the market. And in the past 2 years, besides Rothko Art Center, Philip also co-curated another important exhibition for Xiaoqing, which was held in Song Museum in Beijing. It was also another big exhibition with a lot of interesting angles because the audience is very different because we were in Beijing. So Philip, how do you see after these two major exhibitions, curation, how do you see the historical significance of Xiaoqing's art in post-war abstract art history?
I think the first thing to say is that 1981 is the year that Kandinsky's essay on the spirituality in art is translated into Chinese. This is a very important moment. A lot of my Beijing friends actually begin making abstract art after 81 in the 80s because of Kandinsky. Xiaoqing's been making abstract art for 20 or 30 years before that. So he's a very interesting figure because at one level, he's the grandfather of all these abstract artists in China. But at another level, he's his own younger son. So the reason I wanted to call the Song Museum show Artist as Astronaut is that he was very interested in being an astronaut. He even wrote to NASA asking if he could be the first artist astronaut. But if you look at his paintings, he and Fontana, the great Italian artist, are working together at trying to make paintings that are both deeply traditional and are about inner space and are also about outer space at the same time. So the really odd thing and the fascinating thing, and hence in the beginning is my end as a title, is he belongs completely to the past, completely to the present, and completely to a multicultural future. And I think that what makes him a very, very rare artist. You know, you look at the 60s work and at one level it looks like 1960s. You look at it with a different pair of eyes and it looks like traditional Chinese painting. You look at it with another pair of eyes and it looks like a kind of art that is only just coming into being. I've often thought it's fascinating that in the 60s, he turned from oil to acrylic. Acrylic was a new form, but he used acrylic the way a traditional Chinese artist might have used ink. It's characteristic, I think, of Xiaoqing that he finds a way of being deeply contemporary and deeply traditional at the same time.
Yeah, in fact, in 1950, Xiaoqing started to paint. So, and also he learned from also a lot of like Western influence by a lot of Western artists. At that time, he started to paint in oil and then started in ink. And then when he began his journey in Milan, I remember from 1960 to 1962, I still saw a lot of ink work by Xiaoqing, although the presentation is totally like Western abstract. Until 1963, he began to be obsessed by the acrylic. So to Xiaoqing at that time when he was in the early to mid 20s, he also tried to explore a lot of new ideas, explore new medium. In this context, Felix, when we talk about modern art history, especially in the 20th century in Asia, so how do you compare Xiaoqing to his like former fellows like Zhao Qi, Zhu Dechun, or Wu Guanzhong, who who actually lived and explored their journey in Paris, while Xiaoqing began his career in Milan. So how would you see their similarities or their differences?
Well, I would say they were similar because they are overseas Chinese artists. They used to be recognized as overseas Chinese artists, but we no longer use this term, which makes them narrow when before we define them as post-war Chinese or post-war Asian artists, which belong to an universal definition for all the international masters who belongs to the time of mid-20th century. The life and career of Xiaoqing, it's very different from the French Chinese school, the Chinese French school, say Zhao Qi, whose artistic language, it's much more influenced by the lyrical abstraction, which began in Paris after 1950s. Xiaoqing, his artistic language is very unique. It's very different from the rest of the world, from all the abstract languages that belongs to the contemporary artists of him. It's not abstract expressionistic, nor is he geometrical abstraction. He is more like very, very special. He has his own concept. He initiated the Punto movement, which uphold the Eastern philosophy as the core of his artistic language. But at the same time, he is very open to the inspiration from Lucio Fontana, Enrico Castellani, to the American epics, including Mark Rothko, Franz Klein. But it's not very much following the art form of these great artists. He still has his very unique and that you can immediately identify that this is the Xiaoqing's work. So I believe that it makes him very artistically independent, and at the same time, it's making him very iconic in the art market. Even it's 2020s already.
Yeah, thank you. And Farida, I remember you and Philip actually discussed how to, in future, present Xiaoqing and Mark Rothko's painting to build a dialogue in front of the audience. So by the end of this panel discussion, I want to go back to you because we had a beautiful exhibition in Mark Rothko Art Center, thanks to you and Philip. How do you register these two great masters of abstract art? And how do you see the link between their spiritual abstraction? Is it just only because both they got influenced by Buddhism, or you could also see other essence that we may overlook?
You see, both artists invested a lot of transcendence in their works, and they both value spirituality and philosophic values. And of course, yeah, it has happened already at Mark Rothko Center that two great artists were exhibited next to each other, just separate by one wall, you know, and it was a silent dialogue. Xiaoqing mentioned that Mark Rothko was not very talkative, and I remember his one of his famous statements that silence is so accurate. Yeah, and remembering another great Eastern philosopher, Rumi, he wrote, "Silence is a language of God. All the rest is a bad translation." Yeah. So you see, both artists created very transcendental, meditative, impressive, large-scale works, and yeah, it would be so great just to put them each to front each other. And yeah, of course, it's a dream project, and I think it would be very exciting to, yeah, to find yourself in such a space.
We definitely look forward to it. Hopefully, after the COVID situation pass, then we can reactivate this discussion. So thank you very much, Farida. Thank you, Philip, and thank you, Felix. This is a very rare and unique opportunity to have these experts with us to talk about post-war abstract art, to talk about Xiaoqing. So now I will leave this 15 minutes of our program to our audience, and feel free to ask questions. I already got some questions on hand, but if you have any questions, please feel free to write to us. So, okay, so I have a question here. So actually, this is about the market. So Felix,
Yeah.
Can you tell us more about the current market trending and foreseeable development of Asian abstract art?
It's getting more and more important. It has been important, but I think the development of the Asian abstraction is just at the beginning, because we have superstars in the market, Daugavpils, but at the same time, people are looking forward to the up and coming artists. It doesn't mean that they're looking for young artists, but they're looking for a young market. So Xiaoqing, it's apparently taking the lead in terms of the emerging post-war abstract market in Asia, and his performance actually has brought us a lot of confidence for the rest of his contemporaries, whether or not he knew them in person, because they represent a generation, a phenomenon which happened 60, 70 years ago. And I believe the trend is going to push the market forward in the upcoming 3 to 5 years. And I'm personally very, very happy. I'm very glad to see that what we've done in the auction market is not just making a commercial success for the artists, but it is also drawing the attention of our collectors and even institutions and museums, and help bring the reputation of the artist to another standard, another level.
Yeah, thank you.
I wanted to add one thing, if I may. And,
yes.
And this is just the advice from somebody not involved in the art market. I'm not sure I would go on so much as of Xiaoqing as an abstract artist, but just as an artist. I think that's what's really interesting about him. So that's one thing. The second thing is to say, I took a 5-museum tour of Sean Scully to China, and Sean now is in auction houses in Hong Kong and on mainland China. And I would hope now it's that Xiaoqing and the other interesting Chinese artists actually begin to appear in Sotheby's London as much as in Sotheby's Hong Kong, because in a way that would be testament to the fact that the market and collectors had caught up with the reality of life, which is actually, it's a global world, and Xiaoqing is as much, as it were, belongs to the London art market as he does to the Hong Kong market. And my view, that should be the next ambition.
What do you think, Felix?
Well, indeed, this is part of our vision. We are not only aiming to promote Xiaoqing in Hong Kong. That's why as I said, I'm really glad to see that Xiaoqing has been touring commercially or non-commercially to Beijing, to Paris, to Latvia, London, more to go. I mean, this is the vision of us in Xiaoqing, and we believe that he deserves it. He deserves the international reputation, and that's why Sotheby's London, why not?
So we have another question here to you, Philip. It's more academic question. So do Eastern philosophies, religious ideas, and essence of the spirit contradict with Western art when merging into its system? Are the circumstances any different today?
If you go back to the 18th century, in the 18th century, Chinese thought and philosophy and aesthetics was extraordinarily important in Europe. If you look at who designed the first Olivetti computer in Milan, it was a Chinese guy living in Milan. In other words, my view is that East and West were categories that were probably necessary and useful for some time, and Eastern and Western philosophy, but actually any proper university now would teach Lao Tzu next to Aristotle. We shouldn't, in my view, make the kinds of distinctions we've made. So the truth is, if you look at, 20th century British art, think of Anthony Gormley, the sculptor who's in Hong Kong. He wanted to become a Buddhist monk. That was his ambition at one stage of his life. So no, I don't think there's a contradiction between the two. People in China read Kandinsky, and people in London and Milan read Lao Tzu or Confucius. That is the true history of the world. And the tragedy is the institutions are slow, particularly the museums, in catching up with it. So to take another Chinese artist, Zhang Deshan, he's in the British Museum in London, not in Tate Modern. That's crazy, okay? And in the same way, you want Xiaoqing both in the British Museum and in Tate Modern. We've just got to shake up the institutions. They're slow and sleepy, and the world was always much more interesting, actually, than the institutions know.
I also see the landscape is different now, especially in the last 10 years. The rise of Asian art markets, and also the social media infiltration. So the way and also the time that we spend on appreciating art or looking for art information, totally different now. And I agree that sometimes when we try to discuss with museums, they may have their own policies, they may have their own agenda, which may not necessarily be favorable to, as you mentioned, Philip, pushing the boundaries within this modern context. But it is also giving us a lot of rooms, like you as a renowned curator and me as the gallerist and also our platform organizer, or Felix as the auction house, the head and specialist, to curate or to introduce artists of different backgrounds, not necessarily only dictated by a museum, but it could be more diverse now. And it is also not too bad that we started or we created some interesting dialogue and trigger some other museums or academic fellows to follow up or to study. So I think this is now the world become more transparent and also could be more fun. That's how I see. It is sometimes also quite frustrating, but like in these 2-3 years, but I also felt very positive when we were in China. There are so many private museums, government-owned museum. They are very proactive. They have the resources. They want to do a lot of things. They want to introduce Western or overseas art to mainland China to open their own eyes. I think we, in this market, I think we still have a lot of energies building up here.
I agree. Just one thing to add on the image that's in front of us. I suppose the thing that I feel, if I look at this painting, is this an abstract painting or is this a landscape painting of outer space? And the truth is it's both.
Yeah.
And I think the either or we should abolish It's always now, not only, but also. And I think that's the critical thing that I'm arguing, that actually, of course, he's an abstract artist, but he's also a landscape artist. And a lot of those works you've got in the Hong Kong show look to me like landscapes seen from above. You know, he's a fascinating figure, as so many of that generation were, playing between abstraction and landscape, between Eastern and Western, between modern and traditional. What makes them distinctive, I think, is they won't settle. They're permanently unsettled artists.
Yeah, this is absolutely inspiring. So Felix, would you also agree to to abolish the term of like abstraction?
Yeah, I'm more than happy to. I really appreciate what Philip wrote for Xiaoqing for the Latvia exhibition last year. It's really inspiring, and it has given us, not only me, but the entire modern team of Southeast Asia, how we should reread the art of Xiaoqing and the message and the idea behind his paintings.
Yeah. So and also when Philip mentioned about the painting behind me, yeah, it was exhibited in Rothko Art Center and also exhibited in Song Museum. In the last 2 years, actually, we started the museum exhibitions since 2018. We had one big exhibition in Shanghai China Art Museum called Coming Home, because Xiaoqing was born in Shanghai, as said. And then in 2019, we had another exhibition, The Colors of Zen, in Musique Made in Paris, followed by 2020, Rothko Art Center. And 2021, we have also Philip's curation in Song Museum for Xiaoqing. Unfortunately, in the last 1.5 years or 2 years, basically a lot of collectors, or including art lovers media, they hardly be able to travel to Latvia, to London, or to Beijing to see these amazing museum shows. So here I am very honored to have this exhibition. After these beautiful collections traveling around the world, today actually we just opened a new exhibition for Xiaoqing in Hong Kong called From Beijing to Paris. So we handpicked a collection of paintings which was exhibited in these museum shows in the past 2-3 years. And then we had one exhibition in Hong Kong. And this is also the exhibition of Xiaoqing since 2019, when Felix organized a major exhibition for Xiaoqing in Sotheby's art space in Hong Kong. So this time the objective is to reintroduce these museum shows. We had also beautiful books and catalogs printed, and also give the opportunity to our Asian and Hong Kong collectors to read the books, to see these beautiful works exhibited in Rothko Art Center, and also to continue foster the dialogues. So so we just started the private viewing today, and with the webinar now, together with the experts, together with you guys, and we will open the exhibition in early September. So hopefully everyone here in the Zoom room would, I would like to invite you guys to continue to and appreciate Xiaoqing's painting, and also come to our Hong Kong gallery to see the exhibition. And today, thank you again, Farida. Thank you, Philip, and thank you, Felix, for your valuable sharing. And I hope in future we will get together again. And hopefully next time it will be the exhibition of Rothko and Xiaoqing together, and have the two spiritual abstract artist paintings side by side in front of us. Okay.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you very much. Yeah. Goodbye. Yeah.
Bye.
Bye.
Bye.